And welcome to a quick discussion of Resident Evil. This month is the 25th anniversary of the original PS1 Resident Evil, so I thought it would be fun to play a little bit of my first game in the series, which was the remake of the original. This is specifically the PS4 version, but it's basically available on all current platforms. I distinctly remember trying to play this game for the first time on Xbox 360 actually, and I was really sick and wanted a new game to play, so I kind of decided to play Resident Evil on a whim, and I really liked it. I'm not usually the biggest fan of horror, but I really enjoyed this game to the point where I played it multiple times, trying to get better at the game. Not exactly trying to speedrun it, I never got that good at the game. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this game. It's not a particularly long game, so I feel like multiple playthroughs are encouraged. And yeah, there are various unlockables for completing the game multiple times, like extra costumes and things like that. Normally, I play as Jill Valentine. There are two characters, Jill and Chris Redfield, who I feel like is better known for the later games, specifically Resident Evil 5, for meme reasons. But Jill is a much easier character to play as because she has more inventory space and a lockpick. In the original, she is dubbed as the Master of Unlocking, from what I remember. So yeah, that means she gets a lockpick early on and can get through certain doors a little bit earlier, from what I understand. But again, I haven't personally ever done a crisp playthrough of this game. Here we have our first zombie. We can actually see it in the mirror behind us. So instead of using up ammo, I'm going to try to quickly run past it, like so. Resident Evil tends to encourage item conservation, so ammo and health restoring items tend to be very sparse. So it's best to avoid combat whenever possible. And that's something I do enjoy about these games, even a lot of the later games. The other thing about Resident Evil that's kind of interesting is how the series has changed over the years. So the series originally started out with fixed camera angles and tank controls, so pressing forwards and backwards on the control pad or control stick will move the character forwards and backwards. Pressing left and right will make the character turn, but for the HD remaster, it is possible to have free controls with the control stick. So that's neat, but it is possible to even set the control stick to the original setup as well. This version is also widescreen, by cutting off the top and bottom of the screen and simply panning the camera when necessary. So it's also possible to set the game to 4:3 instead. Overall, I feel like this game still looks pretty impressive, considering it was an early GameCube title. It still looks pretty solid, actually. Some of the pre-rendered backgrounds are showing their age, similar to a lot of games that use pre-rendered backgrounds. But yeah, overall, this still looks pretty great, I think. Like, specifically the previous gen versions for PS3 and 360, I think, look really impressive because this game actually doesn't look too unconvincing as, like, of a PS3 game, as an example. On later hardware, it definitely seems a little bit more antiquated at times. Certain areas in particular look very very blurry, specifically the background quality, but this is still much better than, say, like a Final Fantasy, where the character models are really high resolution and then the backgrounds are extremely low resolution. This is a pretty good balance, I'd say, between the two. The fixed camera angles definitely make some areas of the game a lot scarier. Like right now, there is a zombie in this room, but we can't see where it is because of the camera. And while it is kind of a weird limitation, it does help to make the game scarier because you can't see what's around you very easily. After Resident Evil 3 for PS1 and Code Veronica for Dreamcast, the series would move towards a third-person, like, over-the-shoulder perspective, starting with Resident Evil 4, and that's kind of what the series stuck with until Resident Evil 7, which moved to first-person. So after this game, a few years later, I would try out Resident Evil 2, the original, because the remake was either just about to release or had released, and I didn't play it right away. So before playing the remake, I did play one route of the original RE2, specifically a Claire playthrough. I never got around to a Leon playthrough of the original. But overall, that's also a really good classic-style, fixed-camera-style Resident Evil. It's really good, and again, holds up really well. The original PS1 games tended to be a little bit campier, partly because of having worse graphics and also worse voice acting. But besides that, I think Resident Evil 2 holds up a lot better than the PS1 version of Resident Evil 1, partly because Resident Evil 2 Remake is a third-person game instead of a fixed camera game. And as a result, both versions kind of stand apart better than this version of RE1 compared to the original, because this is still the same gameplay style, but with more content, better graphics, and overall better gameplay, so there's not really a reason to go back to the PS1 version, while with Resident Evil 2, the remake and the original are still very different games, and thus there's still some merit to actually playing both. So yeah, after that, I played 2 Remake, and that's actually my favorite Resident Evil. Overall, I have actually done around 10 playthroughs since it released, which was only 2019, so I think that says a lot. And I want to say it's actually one of my favorite games of last gen. I just really like that game a lot. I know it's not as good of a remake as this game because of Resident Evil 2 playing so differently than the original, and also not entirely capturing everything perfectly, but as a standalone interpretation of Resident Evil 2, the remake is still very good. I still haven't finished Resident Evil 3. I have it, but I never got past, like, the first fight with Nemesis right before the police station. And I'm not even sure why. Well, part of it's because my PS3 is not in the best of shape, and I have the PS Classics version. So that's the reason why I never got that far, but also, it never quite interested me. it's definitely more action-oriented, and that also applies to the remake as well. Resident Evil 3 Remake was released in, like, spring 2020, and even though I really like Resident Evil 2 a lot, I think Resident Evil 3 Remake is kind of... it's good, but it's a little bit more, like, bland, if that makes sense. Like, it's not as memorable as Resident Evil 2 Remake, and also is an even worse remake because it really strays far away from the source material, even compared to 2 Remake. Even with the even beyond the change in camera perspective, a lot of locations and set pieces are completely absent, and thus 3 Remake isn't really well liked. I still think it's a good game, but just kind of anticlimactic after 2, and also, again, not exactly a very good remake. And also kind of just an underwhelming game in its own right. But it's still fun. But yeah, after 3 Remake, I played 4, which was kind of a mistake because I got used to how those games controlled, and 4 is kind of a hybrid of the over-the-shoulder perspective with tank controls. So 4 is a lot more, it's a lot tougher to control, even though it does play a lot like 2 and 3's remakes. I don't know if I want to be in this room yet. I really haven't gone back to this game very often since playing 2. Quite frankly, this was a game I played a ton when it was new, or when I first played it. And then, basically after Resident Evil 2 Remake, I started to fixate on that game instead. So yeah, by the way, this over here, this room has one of the most famous cutscenes of the original, but because they redubbed all the dialogue, I feel like this cutscene isn't as well remembered in the remake, but it's still fairly iconic. So yeah, past 4, I haven't played any of them. I haven't played 5, 6, or 7. I have not played Revelations, and I have not played much of Revelations 2. The first chapter of Revelations 2 was released for free at one point, so I have played a little bit of it, but not very much. So, as we leave this room, something will happen. So basically, we have to check both doors, and both are locked at this point.
Oh god, what did I do now? Wesker! Barry! Help!
Jill! You in there?
Barry? Get me out of here! The door's jammed!
Stand back! Grab my hand!
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Really? Thanks. But Barry, didn't you say you were going back to the dining room to find other clues? I'm glad and all, but why are you here?
I just had something I wanted to check. Anyway, we should get back to searching for Wesker and Chris.
Thanks, Barry. I owe you one.
Don't mention it.
So in the original, Barry says something about, "That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich." And the voice acting is notoriously bad. I'm kind of glad the remake kind of keeps the essence of the line, but kind of adapts it to be a little bit less corny, while still acknowledging the original line. So over here, oh, hi. Looks like we have our first actual enemy to fight. Combat in this game isn't great, partly because of the tank controls. So let's see how this goes. That actually went okay. I'm not sure if this strategy works well in this game, or if it's more of an RE4 tactic to try to use the knife to deal with enemies that are on the ground. This game has a very unique gimmick over even the original, where downed zombies will turn into stronger zombies called Crimson Heads, unless you basically burn the bodies as you go along. So in addition to conserving ammunition, that's another reason to, in general, avoid combat, to avoid creating a bunch of Crimson Heads to deal with. So yeah, overall, this game is a lot of fun. One problem, actually, on PS4 specifically, is the controls for aiming. So basically, L1 is aim and R1 is fire, which means that R2 brings up the map of the mansion, or whatever area you're in. There are other areas as well. On 360, it's left trigger and right trigger for aiming and firing guns. A lot of PS3 games use L1 and R1, and it kind of isn't great. And a lot of times when they've brought over, when they would bring over games, like Uncharted is a good example, they would switch the buttons to, like L would be L2 and R1 would be R2. This is a case where they didn't switch it for PS4, and it's a little bit clunky as a result. I was pressing the wrong button, right on cue actually. So that's not great, because, again, another Crimson Head will appear later on there. So yeah, there are a lot of cool things in this game, even despite its age. This remaster honestly does a good job of modernizing it enough to still be very approachable, despite, like, the differences from modern Resident Evil games, especially like the first-person ones like Resident Evil 7 and 8, or Village, more specifically. But yeah, this is still a very fun game. Again, I probably would play it more, but right now, again, my focus for Resident Evil games is mostly on Resident Evil 2 and trying to S-rank playthroughs of that. But yeah, overall, this is still a really good game. It's often very inexpensive for one or both of Zero and this in the collection. Even if Zero isn't very good, if you can find, like, the physical collection of Resident Evil Origins, the Origins collection might be worth it just to have a hard copy of the first game, because it's routinely like $20, and I think even just for the one game, not even for Zero, it would still be worth it. So yeah, that is a quick look at the remake of the original Resident Evil. I'm interested to see where the franchise goes from here. I know there's a lot planned, like Village, a multiplayer game, like a Netflix series, and a live-action movie, so it'll be interesting to see how all this does in the future. But with that, I am going to call things here for now. So thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another discussion.